The Young and the Restless spoilers. Ever since Matt, now calling himself Mitch Bacall, slipped back into Genoa City like a ghost from a buried past, nothing had remained untouched. His presence didn't just disrupt the balance of power, it poisoned the air itself, turning every quiet corner into a potential battleground and forcing even the strongest to reevaluate their allegiances. It was as if the very foundation of the city trembled the moment he stepped foot inside it, and the unsettling truth was that no one fully understood what he wanted. They only knew that danger followed him like a shadow. The first to feel the impact, ironically, the one who seemed the farthest removed from this new storyline, was Nikki Newman. For decades, Nikki had stood at Victor's side during wars, scandals, betrayals, and battles that would have broken lesser people. But beneath all that glamour and elegance, she was still human. Still vulnerable. Still someone whose strength came at great personal cost. And lately, there had been something brittle in her voice, something weary in the way she held herself, as though life had placed one burden too many upon her shoulders. Because while the world saw Nikki as the formidable Newman matriarch, the truth was she had no one guarding her. Not in the quiet hours when the mansion felt too large and the shadows stretched too far across the floor. The rumor began circulating in whispers. Someone had broken into Nikki's room. At first, it sounded impossible. The Newman ranch was protected by layers of security, reinforced locks, surveillance, and guards trained to recognize even the smallest anomaly. But on this night, somehow, someone had slipped past everything. And when Nikki pushed open the door to her bedroom, sensing something wrong, she realized too late that she wasn't alone. She saw only fragments, a blurred silhouette, a pair of eyes gleaming with cold purpose, a posture that sent a bolt of fear through her. She gasped, instinctively stepping back, and in that instant, the intruder lunged. The attack was sudden, violent, and terrifying. Nikki didn't stand a chance. She hit the carpet before she could scream, her body motionless as the figure escaped through the balcony into the night. Later, when the police arrived, the room showed signs of a struggle. Items were overturned. A drawer was ripped open. Something had been taken, but no one yet knew what. And that was the most unsettling part. What could this intruder want? Why Nikki? What purpose could an aging woman, fragile and recovering from her past battles, possibly serve in this escalating storm? Victor Newman's roar shook the hallways of Memorial Hospital when he arrived. His fury was volcanic, the kind of rage that made even seasoned detectives step back. His wife, his partner, his greatest love, the woman who had survived addiction, cults, car crashes, kidnappings, and enemies he had personally buried, was now lying unconscious because someone dared to cross the Newman threshold. Nick Newman was no better. He paced in front of the nurse's station like a caged tiger, demanding answers no one could give him. His mother had been attacked. In her own home. And the suspect, if the whispers were true, was Matt, a man with a vendetta that stretched across decades and had already left scars on the Newman family tree. But the most haunting detail was the one Victor couldn't shake, the description Nikki managed to whisper before she lost consciousness again. She had said that the intruder's build, his movement, the way he stood in the shadows, it all pointed to Matt. 80% certainty, she whispered. Not complete certainty, but enough to send chills down Victor's spine. If it truly was Matt, then this attack was intentional. And if it was intentional, then he was escalating. Victor slammed his fist against the wall outside Nikki's hospital room, not caring who saw. He had fought many enemies in his lifetime, but this was different. This was personal. And it wasn't just personal because Nikki had been hurt, though that alone would have been enough to ignite his fury. It was personal because Matt had chosen someone defenseless, someone who posed no threat, someone whose only crime was being connected to the Newman name. Nick couldn't stop trembling with anger. He replayed the scene in his mind over and over, imagining the fear Nikki must have felt. The thought of her lying there, trying to defend herself against a younger, stronger attacker, made him feel sick. The guilt hit him next. He should have been there, should have checked on her, should have insisted on extra protection. He pressed his hand to his forehead as if trying to stave off the guilt that threatened to consume him. Meanwhile, whispers began circulating across Genoa City. If Matt attacked Nikki, who would be next? What was he looking for? And why now, after all these years? Claire overheard some of the murmurs and froze, feeling a wave of dread wash over her. She didn't know Matt personally, but she had been raised to read patterns, to track threats, to anticipate violence, thanks to Jordan's training. And this attack didn't feel random. It felt like the opening move in a larger game. One that she, Victor, Nick, Noah, and even Audra might somehow be tangled in. The idea that she could use Jordan's lessons to fight Matt no longer seemed abstract, it felt necessary. The war Matt was bringing to Genoa City wasn't like the battles Victor had fought with corporate enemies or romantic rivals. This was psychological. Personal. Surgical. A strike designed to destabilize, terrify, and weaken the Newman family from the inside. And it had worked. The moment Nikki fell, the equilibrium collapsed. The family was on edge. Victor's enemies smelled blood. Nick was spiraling. Claire was rethinking every choice she made. And somewhere in the darkness of Genoa City, Matt was watching, waiting, preparing his next move. The hospital seemed too quiet for the level of chaos boiling beneath its sterile fluorescent lights. Nikki Newman lay unconscious in a private room, machines humming steadily beside her. But outside those walls, the storm was only growing stronger. Victor stood rigid, barely holding himself together, his hands clasped behind his back in a way that told anyone who knew him that he was seconds away from unleashing something catastrophic. Nick paced like a man possessed, unable to sit, unable to breathe normally, replaying images of the attack even though he hadn't seen it happen. Every detail the detectives whispered only fueled his rage: forced entry, missing items, signs of struggle. And that single clue Nikki had murmured, Matt. It looked like Matt. It had been years since the Newmans even spoke his name, years since Matt Clark vanished into the shadows, presumed dead or at least permanently removed from their orbit. Yet here he was, resurrected under the alias Mitch Bacall, weaving himself back into their lives like a venomous serpent. No one knew why, but one thing was painfully clear now: Nikki's attack wasn't random. It was deliberate. It was strategic. And it was only the beginning. Claire Grace Newman sat in the waiting area, hands trembling in her lap, though she hid it well. Her mind raced faster than her pulse. The moment she learned Nikki had been attacked, she felt a cold blade of guilt slide between her ribs, not because she was responsible, but because she recognized the pattern. Jordan had once taught her to study weakness, to find the most vulnerable point in any structure, and break it first. She realized with growing horror that this was exactly what Matt had done. In the Newman family, Victor and Nick were protected by power and anger. Victoria had resources. Adam had unpredictability. Sharon had intuition. But Nikki? Nikki had love, grace, and fragility. And people with those traits were always the first to be targeted by predators. Claire hated that she understood this logic, hated that these instincts still lived inside her, but she couldn't deny it. Matt was operating on the same playbook Jordan had used. Which meant Claire might be the only one who could anticipate his next move. She rose to her feet, unable to sit any longer, and walked toward the hallway where Victor and Nick stood. Nick turned, his eyes blazing with frustration. "You need to go home and rest," he snapped, not out of cruelty but out of panic. Claire shook her head, her voice low but steady, explaining that she couldn't leave, not when Nikki was in danger. Victor watched her closely, silently weighing her motives. He saw something different in her today, something sharper, stronger. A flicker of determination that reminded him of Nikki in her younger years, or even Sharon during her fiercest battles. Claire insisted she could help, that she could sense things others might overlook. Victor didn't fully trust her, not yet, but he had seen firsthand the instincts she possessed. If Claire felt compelled to stay, he wouldn't stop her. Meanwhile, across town, Audra Charles was pacing in her luxury apartment, trying to make sense of the unfolding chaos. The news of Nikki's attack had begun to spread privately among the city's elite, and Audra sensed danger in every corner, though not out of empathy. If Matt was behind the attack, and all evidence pointed that way, then Audra's carefully maintained life might implode. Matt had crossed paths with her more than once. Their history was muddled with alliances, threats, and shared secrets she had buried. And if Matt was desperate enough to break into the Newman ranch, he was desperate enough to expose those secrets. Fear slid through Audra in a way she had not felt in years. She prided herself on staying 2 steps ahead, but this? This was a wildfire she could not predict, let alone control. Back at the hospital, Nate Hastings entered Nikki's room, his face tight with concern. He reviewed her scans and assured Victor that though she suffered a severe fall and temporary loss of consciousness, she would recover physically. But Victor didn't care about recovery at the moment, he cared about vengeance. Once Nate left, Victor closed the door and stood over Nikki with a grief-stricken intensity. He whispered a promise she couldn't hear, a vow that chilled even him: whoever touched her would never breathe freely again. Victor Newman was not a man who made empty threats, and when his fury was quiet, it was the most dangerous of all. Nick joined him moments later, and the 2 men exchanged a look that held decades of shared battles. Nick's voice cracked when he finally said the words out loud: "He hurt Mom." In her own home. Victor nodded, jaw clenched. The question wasn't whether they would retaliate, it was how soon. And though Victor's mind immediately went to private investigators, security upgrades, and tracking Matt's movements, Nick's mind went somewhere darker. He wanted to find Matt himself. He wanted to make him pay in ways the law never could. Claire approached cautiously, interrupting their silent rage. She told them she had been studying the pattern of the attack, and though she hesitated to mention Jordan, she explained that the intruder's behavior didn't feel random. It felt planned. Strategic. Personal. Victor's eyes narrowed in recognition. She was right. And if Matt followed a strategy, they needed someone who understood that strategy. Quietly, reluctantly, Victor nodded for Claire to continue. She told them they needed to reevaluate the items stolen, not as objects, but as symbols. What did the attacker want? What message was he sending? Victor listened, surprised by the clarity in her reasoning. Nick, though resistant, realized Claire might be their only link to understanding Matt's motives. Meanwhile, Kane Ashby, hearing about Nikki's attack, felt a wave of unease. Not because he cared about the Newmans, though part of him did, but because chaos tended to expose secrets. And he had many. Phyllis Summers, too, felt the air shift. She wasn't close to Nikki, but the violence unsettled her. It reminded her that in Genoa City, villains didn't always wear their masks openly. Some waited patiently for their moment. But Matt's moment had already begun. Somewhere in the city, in a dimly lit room, Matt cleaned off his bruised knuckles and stared at an object he had stolen from Nikki's drawer. Something small. Something old. Something that mattered deeply to her, and painfully to Victor. He turned it in his hand with a faint smirk, muttering to himself that the Newmans had forgotten him for too long. But they would remember now. They all would. Victor Newman's fury spread across Genoa City like an electrical storm. The moment the doctors confirmed Nikki was stable but still unconscious, Victor didn't hesitate. He issued an order that shook the entire Newman empire: find the man who did this. Now. His voice carried that cold, unmistakable authority that had once toppled corporate empires and dismantled entire families. Every security team, every private investigator, every loyalist who owed Victor even a sliver of allegiance received the same directive: track down the intruder, uncover every footprint, every thread, every motive, every possible suspect. No one would rest until the truth was dragged into the light. But even as Victor's network expanded into a citywide manhunt, everyone understood the same chilling reality. All they could do now was wait. Wait for Nikki to open her eyes. Wait for her to recall what she saw. Wait for her to confirm the identity of the figure who struck her down in her own bedroom. And that helplessness, waiting, was the one thing Victor Newman had never tolerated. Because each passing hour meant uncertainty grew larger, motives became murkier, and the shadow of danger crept closer to the Newman family. Nikki herself lay motionless under soft hospital lighting, a fragile contrast to the storm she had unknowingly unleashed. The most troubling question loomed over her bed like a ghost: would she remember? The blow to her head had been heavy, enough to knock her unconscious, enough to disorient her, enough to raise the terrifying possibility that her memory might be fractured. The doctors didn't say the words out loud, but Victor and Nick saw the hesitation in their eyes. Nikki was not a young woman anymore. A blow like that could cause gaps, confusion, even trauma-triggered amnesia. The idea that Nikki might awaken unable to recall the intruder's face was something Victor refused to consider, but it haunted him silently. Nick sat beside her, hand gripping hers, terrified of what she might wake up to. Would she remember the attack clearly? Or would the memory dissolve into fog, leaving them chasing shadows? Would she remember the intruder's eyes, that silhouette, that brief flash of recognition she thought she saw? Or would her mind protect itself by burying the trauma so deeply they would never retrieve it? As speculation spread, all eyes turned to the most obvious suspect, Matt Clark, or as he now called himself, Mitch Bacall. Rumors had swirled before the attack, the same build, the same posture, the same cold aura Nikki thought she recognized in the darkness. But as the hours stretched longer and Victor replayed every detail in his mind, a troubling contradiction began to surface. Why would Matt attack Nikki? There was no feud between them. No unfinished business. Nikki had never been Matt's target in the past. His war was always with Nick, Sharon, sometimes Victor, but Nikki? Never. And that was what made the attack unsettling. Victor knew Matt was calculating, precise, purposeful. He wasn't the type to strike without motive. Harming Nikki gained him nothing, unless she had something he needed. Or unless she saw something she wasn't supposed to. Or unless someone else had manipulated the situation to make Matt look guilty. Claire, standing by the hallway, felt a cold truth settling in her chest. Maybe the attacker wasn't Matt at all. Maybe the silhouette only resembled him. Maybe Nikki's frightened mind filled in the blanks with the face of the only enemy she subconsciously expected to see. Trauma had a way of blurring details, merging reality and fear into a single distorted image. And Claire couldn't shake the unsettling suspicion that someone else, someone still hiding, had orchestrated the attack with surgical precision. Someone who wanted chaos. Someone who wanted Victor enraged, the Newman family destabilized, and Matt blamed. Someone who benefited from confusion. Nick didn't want to hear it. Rage made him simple, direct, explosive, ready for revenge. But Victor, for all his fury, was beginning to think clearly again. Matt may be guilty, he muttered, but nothing about this feels right. Indeed, the attack lacked Matt's signature. It lacked emotion. It lacked intent. It felt hollow. As if the goal wasn't to destroy Nikki, but to send a message. Or confuse witnesses. Or steal something without drawing attention, except the blow had been too brutal, too desperate. Could it have been a hired attacker? Someone framing Matt? Someone who knew how to mimic his movements? Someone who wanted Victor to go after the wrong enemy? Even more troubling, Nikki's room had been searched. Something was missing. Something small. Something meaningful. Victor still didn't know what. Until Nikki woke up, all they had were fragments. But one thing was becoming clear. If Matt wasn't the attacker, then a far more dangerous puppet master had just entered the game. Va Kudu, Van Dang and Trong Bong Toi.